Okay, we are connected on Facebook Live.
Hey, we welcome our viewers for this talk by Shri Pratik Desai ji. Pratik Desai ji takes a lot of efforts to address various subjects related to Sanatan Dharma from Vaishnav, from the line of Vaishnava Acharyas, and he takes a lot of pains to clarify so many subject matters which otherwise tend to have people have a lot of questions and no clear answer. And Pratik ji does his bit to get clarity on these. So Pratik ji, today I think we discuss something on Bhagavad Gita. Is that right?
Sorry?
Today we are discussing something on the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
Bhagavad Gita, the main, what is the main crux of Bhagavad Gita? I mean, the, the, the subject of absolute truth as explained by Bhagavad Gita and how it is directly connected to Lord Krishna. How is Lord Krishna the essence of that absolute truth, the Param Tattva? How is Krishna the Param Tattva as described in the Bhagavad Gita?
Okay. Right. So thank you, Rajiv ji, for the kind invitation and uh, your wonderful efforts to share the message of Sanatan Dharma or Vedic scriptures for the benefit of so many people, especially in India, because in India there is a lot of misunderstanding and also a lot of hodgepodge philosophy, which people kind of repel people because if they do not have something which is straightforward, then there is a tendency to be repelled by it. So, which is also natural because there are so many religions out there, and it is so difficult to put faith in a particular religion. That's why the entire attempt of this series is to somehow make people understand what is the goal of the Bhagavad Gita, because there are so many versions of Bhagavad Gita, and how, and to also find out what is the conclusion, what is the final conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita. So I just wanted to share that in the previous series we did discuss about the plural paths that Bhagavad Gita promotes, but then ultimately it also establishes how Bhakti Yoga is actually the goal of all these paths and the final destination. So basically, the Bhagavad Gita culminates in Bhakti Yoga, and there are many logical and shastric authoritative reasons why Bhakti Yoga is actually claimed to be the ultimate goal and the final path. And then all other paths, they are subservient to this path. So, and then we also discussed about the Bhagavad Gita also talks about Bhakti Yoga being the bestower of the topmost result of whatever one wishes to achieve in life. And then there are other paths also, but all these other paths, they award different destinations, but they're all subordinate to the result that the Bhakti Yoga awards. So we discussed all these points in our last session, and then we also discussed about is demigod worship proper, and why yoga is, the meaning of yoga is generally interpreted as Bhakti Yoga by the followers of Bhakti Yoga. So in general, yoga can also mean karma yoga, gan yoga, dhyan yoga, ashtanga yoga. But then in many places, there are verses in the Bhagavad Gita which are interpreted in terms of bhakti yoga. So why all these things are there? So we have covered all these points in detail. And today you have asked about how Bhagavad Gita establishes Krishna as the supreme param tattva. So there are, obviously we know there are demigods, and then there is the different aspects of the absolute nature, absolute truth. So Brahman is one of the most popular aspects of the absolute truth, and the super soul is also another aspect of the absolute truth. So then how Krishna fits in this category of the absolute truth, how he is being referred to as the supreme Brahman in the Bhagavad Gita, and where it is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. So these are the questions that generally people present to us, and today we'll be discussing about that. So it is very interesting in the Bhagavad Gita itself. Now, before trying to analyze from the Bhagavad Gita and trying to take evidence from the Bhagavad Gita, or trying to establish the Param Tattva from the Bhagavad Gita, it is assumed that Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the Upanishads. It is also called as Gita Upanishad. And there is a reason, there is a purpose for this, because Bhagavad Gita does gather the essence of all the Upanishads. Because if you read the Bhagavad Gita, all the 700 shlokas of Bhagavad Gita, you will realize that Bhagavad Gita does cover the philosophical conclusions of the Upanishads. So that's why it is rightly called as the Gita Upanishad. Plus, it was directly spoken to Arjun via Krishna, and Krishna is the supreme absolute truth, or let's say even if he is the representative of the absolute truth, then also it is a direct conversation between Krishna and Arjun, kind of Shruti. So although Bhagavad Gita is a part of Mahabharata, which is a Smriti, but because Krishna directly speaks this knowledge to Arjun, and that's why Bhagavad Gita can also be called as Shruti. And Shruti by definition means that which is heard from the absolute truth directly. So that sense, it is not different from the Shruti. So what we assume is, because the reference is only going from the Bhagavad Gita, we are not going to quote from different scriptures. We are only focusing on the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita. So we are assuming that Bhagavad Gita is the natural outcome of the Upanishads, is also the conclusion of the Upanishads, and as such, it is as good as equal as Upanishad. Therefore, whatever Bhagavad Gita establishes as fact can be taken as the fact which is also established by the Upanishads. Okay, and it is the most authoritative scripture, because if something is more authoritative than Bhagavad Gita, then it does not make sense to discuss from the Bhagavad Gita. Then we have to discuss from a scripture which is more authoritative than Bhagavad Gita, the most authoritative scripture, because anything which is inferior to that does not make any sense. Why are we discussing? Because we are trying to get to the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita, and if Bhagavad Gita itself is not sufficient to reveal the highest truth, then it is pointless and useless to discuss and establish from the Bhagavad Gita. So I think this is a natural assumption that we have, and we also probably discussed the same thing in the first class in the series. So now what are we going to do? We are going to see some statements from the Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita defines Brahman, or the absolute truth, in different ways. So what are the different categories of Brahman and the absolute truth which are described in the Bhagavad Gita? First, let's try to analyze that. Okay. So first of all, we need to understand the absolute truth. So the traditional nomenclature, for the absolute truth is Brahman, or the Paratattva, or Param Satyam. And the meaning literally which is translated is supreme truth. So Param, it is kind of equated with Brahman, understanding that Brahman is in general the Param Tattva, or the absolute highest truth, right? So supreme and the greatest. This is what we actually kind of understand by the word Brahman, that which is highest, that which is greatest. Now, what are the different categories of Brahman, which is described in the Bhagavad Gita. So, in the 17th chapter, 23rd verse, and let me share the screen also. 17th, okay, you are 3. One second. Okay, so I'm sharing the screen now. Okay. Om Tad Sad iti nirdesho brahmanastri smita brahmanastena vedascha yagyascha viyata pura. Translation: from the beginning of creation, the three words Om Tat Sat were used to indicate the supreme absolute truth. These three symbolic representations were used by the Brahmanas while chanting the hymns of the Vedas and during sacrifices for the satisfaction of the Supreme. Okay, so the absolute truth indicated by the word Brahman here is represented by Om Tat Sat. So although the words Om Tat Sat, they represent that Brahman, we have no information as to what that absolute truth is. So in this particular verse, this much information is given. Now we'll try to explore the other verses of Gita. So now we'll see how the absolute truth is referred to as Brahman. Okay. Now there are many statements about Brahman in the Gita. We shall quote a few. So in the 14.3, Mama yonir brahma tasmin garbham tadamiyam sambhava sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharata. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the births of all living beings, O son of Bharata. So now this particular here Brahman is referring to the primordial material energy before the variety is manifested, prior to the impregnation of the living entities and their destinies via the glance of the Lord. So it is basically known as Mahatattva in the language of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the scriptures. It is called as the Mahatattva, which is basically the manifested material elements in the material universe. Now, in answer to Arjuna's question in the chapter 8, defined in order to define Brahman, Krishna states 8.3. So we'll go to 8.3. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Aksharam Brahma Paramam Swabhavodhyatmam Uchyate Bhuta Bhavad Bhavo Karo Visarga Karma Samnita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said the indestructible transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to development of the material bodies of the living entity is called karma, fruitive actions. So here, Brahman, indestructible transcendental entity, is also called as Brahman. So we get another concept of Brahman, which is the living entity. And then chapter 4.25. Daivam eva pare yagnam yogina paripasate brahmagnav pare yagnam yagnenaivo pajugdati. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them and offer sacrifices, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of the supreme Brahman. So the Akshara Brahma from chapter 8 is vividly elaborated upon its all pervasive feature in verse 12.3 to 4. यत्वा अक्षरम अनिर्देशम अव्यक्तम पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गम अचिंत्यम च कुटस्थम अचलम ध्रुवम सानीयम येन्द्रिय ग्रामम सर्वत्र समबुद्धय ते प्राप्नुवन्ति माम एव सर्वभूता हितरता. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed, and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such person enjoying the welfare of all, at last achieve me. So here again, you'll see it is referring that Akshar Brahma is referring to the Brahma Jyoti, the unmanifested feature of the absolute truth. And then Brahman is also described or defined in another way, which is in chapter 13.13. Chapter 13 and verse number 13. Yayam yattat pravakshyami yajnatvam asnute anadi mat param brahma nasattan nasat uchyate. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So basically referring to the super soul here. So now, so the Brahman is described or defined in 5 categories according to the Bhagavad Gita. The sum total of matter, Mahatattva, the living entity in terms of sacrifice, the all-pervading Brahmajyoti, and the Paramatma or the super soul, right? So see, it is very interesting. These are all different aspects of Brahman. Now, these are different categories of Brahman, and the Gita describes other Brahman aspects also, further expanding our investigation. To arrive at a clear understanding of what Brahman is, we need to study the definitions which are categorized in the 5 categories. So now from this we can deduce, we can come to, we can analyze 2 things. One is that if all Brahman concepts are on a par or they are all equal, then we must accept a monistic concept of the absolute truth, right? Because everything is one. So all these 5 categories, they become one. So they are all one. Where now each and every one is equal to each other. So it becomes a monistic philosophy. And the second analysis is that another alternative is that such study can also reveal a hierarchy of Brahman. So Brahman can have hierarchy also, indicating variety in the realm of transcendence and a clearly personalized concept of the absolute truth. So here we can clearly understand that either there are 2 possibilities. One is that Brahman, everything is equal because there are 5 categories of Brahman, and if Brahman is equal to all of these, and all of these are equal to each other, then Brahman becomes one. Everything becomes one. That's a monistic philosophy. And the second possibility is that there has to be a hierarchy. Something has to be inferior, something has to be superior, right? So what does Bhagavad Gita say now? How does Bhagavad Gita, Krishna already mentioned about the different categories of Brahman. So does he now talk about hierarchy or does he talk about oneness of Brahman? Okay. So let's try to analyze now. Let's go to verse number 13.32. Same chapter 32 verse. अनादित्वान् निर्गुणात्वात् अना अनादित्वान् निर्गुणात्वात् परमात्मायम् अव्यय शरीरस्थो अपि कौन्तेय न करोति न लिप्यते. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. So, from this statement, we can clearly understand that the transcendental living entity is actually superior to the Mahatattva, the modes of material nature. Right? So, one hierarchy is already established by Krishna amongst the 5 different categories. One is superior, which is the living entity. The living entity is superior to the dull matter. So, because it is transcendental to material nature. Right? Now we'll go to verse number 4.24. ब्रह्मार्पणं ब्रह्मवीर ब्रह्माग्नो ब्रह्मणा हुतं ब्रह्मैव तेन गंतव्यम ब्रह्म कर्मा samadhina. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities. Okay, I think I have not shared the screen. Sorry. Yeah, a person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full absorption, contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. From here, we can understand the elements of sacrifice are explained as being Brahman. However, there is interdependence between the object and the consciousness by which it is employed. Thus, although matter is also Brahman, it has a categorically higher position on the basis of its utility. That means that sacrifice is superior to inert matter, although they are both Brahman. And since that sacrifice is dependent on the consciousness of the Jiva or living entity, the Jiva is even superior to sacrifice and matter both. So, from this particular verse, it is clear that the Jiva is superior to sacrifice and the sum total of matter, which is Mahatattva. So out of the 5 Brahman aspects, the Jiva is superior to the other 2. That is clearly understood that there is a hierarchy here. Now we proceed ahead. So in the 12th chapter, the unmanifest Brahma Jyoti is the subject of meditation for liberation by the Jnani speculator. If emancipation is the result of becoming one with that Brahman, then Brahma Jyoti is higher than Jiva Brahman. Right? So see, it is logical. The Jiva wants to attain a destination, and if that destination is Brahma Jyoti, it means that Brahma Jyoti has to be superior to Jiva. Right? So, from this analysis, it is clear that the Brahma Jyoti is superior to all the other 4. Right? And then in the Akshar Brahma, referring to the super soul, 15.18, is superior to all living entities. 15.18. यस्मात् शरम अतितोहम अक्षराद अपिचोतमा अतोस्मि लोके वेदे च प्रतिता पुरुषोत्तमा. Because I am transcendental beyond both fallible and infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. So from herein it is clear that the super soul is superior to all the living entities. So now the hierarchy, there is a hierarchy in the Brahman which is very much clear to us. And that hierarchy we have already analyzed, and we have come to the conclusion that ultimately super soul is superior to all the other four forms of Brahman. Right? Now, how do we know that Krishna is supreme tattva, or he is that absolute truth? So now we'll come across some statements in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna also says that ultimately all these five categories, they are all subordinate to me also. So now which are these shlokas? So 14.27. So 14.27. Brahmano hi pratishtaham. Okay, let me share the screen. and 27. Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vyayasya cha shashvatasya cha dharmasya sukhas yai kantikasya cha. And I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of the ultimate happiness. So here, very clearly, the Lord states that Brahman he is the base of that impersonal Brahman, Brahmajyoti, and that's how he's supreme. He's superior to Brahmajyoti, and it is the Brahmajyoti is dependent and subordinate aspect of Krishna. Then verse number 12.2. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Mayi Evasya Mano Ye Mam Nitya Yukta Upasate Shraddhaya Parayopetas Teme Yukta Tamamata. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, those who fix their minds on my personal form and are always engaged in worshipping with great and transcendental faith are considered by me to be most perfect. And verse number 13.13. Yayam yattat pravakshami yajnatvam vritam asnute anadi mat param brahma nasattan nasat uchyate. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, the beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So very clearly the Lord says that Brahman is subordinate to me. So because now all the other Brahman features, they are subordinate to the Brahma Jyoti and the Paramatma, we can conclude that all Brahman features are subordinate to Lord Krishna. All the five Brahman features, they are all subordinate to Krishna. Now it is very interesting. So generally the argument is made that Krishna is referring to himself as a manifestation of some subordinate Brahman feature. But this is actually contradictory to the analysis made here, because if Krishna himself is Brahman, then everything becomes Brahman again, because the hierarchy will collapse. So there is no question of a hierarchy. Since Krishna is also Brahman or the Brahmajyoti, then the hierarchy simply will collapse. So that's why if the word mam is translated or interpreted in a different way, then the categories, they will fall apart. Because that's why in this particular verse, Krishna is directly saying that I am superior to the Brahman, the Brahmajyoti as well as the super soul feature. So those statements made by the Lord will become useless, meaningless. Right? So this is how actually it's very logically and easily rejected how Krishna established himself as the supreme truth. So any comment or question?
No, Prabhuji. I will let you know if I have one.
Yeah, but were you able to understand? Were you able to follow what exactly how the analysis is done?
Yes, Prabhuji. I think you are going by the verses which are taking us to the conclusion of Krishna being the Param Tattva, point by point. So we are just following the path at the moment.
Yeah. So this is like very obvious from the Bhagavad Gita, and it is maybe we will not be able to identify it when we read the Bhagavad Gita, but when we read repeatedly and minutely, then we'll be able to understand that Brahman itself is defined in different features, and then there is a hierarchy, and then that hierarchy is ultimately the most param tattva in that hierarchy is established as Krishna. So Krishna says that everything is subordinate to him in this way. So this is just one of the indirect ways how we can deduce. I mean, there are definitely direct statements, like without any kind of analysis, logic, or anything. Uh, there is a clear indication that Krishna is supreme. There's several verses where Krishna has stated that. Okay, so that also will go through, and because we are only going to focus and restrict to the Bhagavad Gita, that's why we won't go to the statements by the other scriptures. There are also other scriptures, Puranas, and Upanishads also, Gopal Tapani Upanishad, which actually proclaim the glory of Krishna and also states that he is actually the supreme person to be worshipped. So, but yeah, definitely we can also analyze from a different angle now. So there are other three evidences which are presented, and I will discuss that. Okay. So now there are many statements in the Bhagavad Gita confirming Lord Krishna's position as the supreme absolute truth, and will I will try to share some proofs. So first proof, in the 15th chapter, Krishna is most explicit about his godhood. So his statements lend themselves to clear comprehension. The first three verses give the example of banyan tree of the material world. And to become free from this entanglement, Krishna explained that one must cut oneself out of this tree with the weapon of detachment and achieve two things. So, what are the two things to be achieved? One is to go to that place from which one never returns. Yasmin gata na nivartanti bhuya. And then surrender to the Supreme Person there. Purusham prapadye. Now, the same verse is also used as reference in chapter 5. Surrender to the Supreme Person from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. Tam eva chadyam purusham prapadye yata pravrti prashrutata purani. The word prashrites is significant here. It is the emphatic form of shrishta or shrita, meaning generation. Lord Krishna defines the Supreme Person or Absolute Truth as source of all things. And a relevant time frame is established by the Lord with the words Pravatti and Purani. They indicate that this process of creation has gone on since Purani, ages gone by, and its origin is Pravritti, since the beginning of time. This is also confirmed by qualifying the Supreme as Adyam or original, indicates the primal nature of the Supreme Person, in that it precedes its creation. Krishna confirmed the basic definition of the absolute truth as the source of everything. And then the question is that who fulfills such criteria? So Krishna explains this directly and indirectly in the same chapter. So the indirect explanation is that verse number 15.4 mentions the Supreme Lord and his residence, the spiritual realm, simultaneously. This Padam Avyayam is mentioned again in verse 15.5. In verse 15.6, Krishna uses the term Tad Dam Paramam Mama, or that supreme abode of mine. And the supreme abode is connected to Krishna. The connection is explicit and the logic is very clear. If the Supreme Person resides in his supreme abode, and here Krishna states that the supreme abode is his mum, the obvious conclusion is that Krishna is the Supreme Person. So verses 15.12 to 15.15 are brief discussion of material elements which are generated by Lord Krishna. He exclusively repeats the term mum or me or mine in this connection. It had been established that the Supreme Lord is cause of everything that exists. Thus, Lord Krishna here again is hinting that it is He who is the source of all the things. This is the indirect understanding. And the direct understanding, in verse number 15.17, he once again mentions the Supreme Person as the Uttama Purusha. In the following verse, 15.18, he states, Atosmi loke vedecha tatita purushottama. I am celebrated both in this world and in the Vedas as that Supreme Person. So the statement very clear, and Lord Krishna's words should be enough. So, but for the skeptics, Krishna is quoting two other source of authorities, the Vedas and the world. This means that people in general, as well as histories and tradition. In this way, three sources of authority are cited for supporting the conclusion. So following verse emphasize this understanding. Once again in 15.19, Krishna calls himself that Purushottam Mamam and declares in 15.20 that this is the most confidential portion of the Vedas, which explains why it is not readily understood. The confidential thing is considered to be most important, but then it is kept secret due to lack of qualification for appreciating its supreme importance. The another proof is in giving his conclusion on Krishna's identity in 10.12 to 10.12 to 13, Arjuna says, Param Brahma Param Dhama Pavitram Paramam Bhavan Purusham Shashvatam Divyam Adi Devam Ajam Vibhum Ahustvam Rishaye Sarve Devarshir Naradastata Asito Devalo Vyasa Swayam Chaiva Bhavishyami. Arjun said, You are the supreme personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, unborn, greatest. All great sages such as Narad, Asit, Deval, and Vyas confirm this truth about you, and now you yourself are declaring to me. So this word is a mine of conclusive statements. It could be analyzed in many ways. The two arguments below repeat the same conclusion for emphasis. First is Parabrahma, the Supreme Brahman, and Purusham Shashvatam, the original person, are equated to Krishna and thus to each other. So this establishes that absolute truth is the Supreme Person of Godhead, which is none other than Lord Krishna. And second, Paramam, the Supreme as an unqualified word, implies the absolute truth, which is as above equated with the original person and Lord Krishna. Thus the same conclusion is also reached. And the third proof. So in the 15th chapter, Lord defines the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tam eva chadyam purusham prapadde yata pravati prashta purani. That Supreme Person from whom everything has begun and in whom everything is abiding since time immemorial. So Arjun states much the same in chapter 10, 10.15. Purushottama Bhuta Bhavana. This means the greatest person is the source of everything. In other words, the absolute truth is the source and abode of everything. This is very much in line with the traditional definition of the absolute truth as found in the Shruti, Janmad Asya Yatha, and the Smriti, Janmad Asya Yato, wherein the same truth is stated. The absolute truth is that from which everything comes. Vedanta Sutra 1.1.2 and Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1. Yeah, so what does this word everything mean? And who is that person who is the source of everything? So there are two approaches to these questions. Analytical study of what one is analytical study of what constitutes everything and he who is the origin of such emanation. And second is a general confirmation of the person who is the source of everything. So both these approaches we can discuss. One, the first approach is so what constitutes the everything. In the there are six quotations from the Bhagavad Gita, which is the first is 9.7, which states that Krishna is the source of everything, is the source of material world. Then 10.2, that Krishna is the origin of all the demigods. In 14.27, he is the basis of Brahman. Then verse 8.4, Krishna is the source of Paramatma. And fifth one, which is Vishnu is but his partial expansion. And sixth one, the last one, other incarnations like Ram are planetary portions, 10.31. So as Lord Krishna is the source of the elements, the sum of which constitutes everything, he can be taken as the source of everything. And thus the Supreme Person of Godhead. And second approach. So there are many statements of Krishna that on their own establish him as the source of everything. Chief amongst them is 10.8, which is Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo Mata Sarvam Pravartate Iti Matva Bhajante Mam Bhuda Bhava Samanvita. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly knows this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So here the word Sarvasya means of all. This indicates Krishna as the Prabhava or source of generation of everything, including worlds, demigods, men, Brahman, Paramatma, Vishnu, and other expansion. Nothing remains outside of the encompassing meaning of the word Sarvasya. So, in order to re-emphasize the point and allay any doubts, the Lord Himself immediately repeats the same thing. He states, Mata Sarvam Parvartate. Everything emanates from me. Points. So, yeah. So twice he is repeating Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo and Mata Sarvam Pravartate in order to dispel any kind of confusion. So those who are Buddha, wise men, worship the Lord with great attention. The Lord identifies himself repeatedly as the object of his description with the words Aham, Mata, and Mam. They all indicate me. Me means the person of Sri Krishna who is standing before Arjun. Had the Lord meant anything else, surely he would have had to qualify it. Since the absolute nature of his statements here regarding the identity of everything in relation to him depend upon a clear understanding of who he is. If the personal reference meant anything other than the self-evident vision present before Arjuna's eyes, the rest of the statements would become obscure and meaningless. So it is very clearly, logically deducted and concluded that Krishna is the source of everything and is also the supreme personality of Godhead. And the Gita clearly demonstrates that Krishna is indeed the supreme absolute truth. So with this, we can come to the conclusion that this is how the Bhagavad Gita establishes Krishna as the supreme tattva. Because there is no other subject which is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. And very, very systematic and very logical arguments And there are no refutations for these arguments, because nowhere in the Bhagavad Gita anything else is stated apart from that. Yeah, there is no. So once we establish that these two things are there, Krishna is the source of everything, and he is the absolute truth, the Param Tattva. There are no statements in the Bhagavad Gita that contradicts these points. If we come to some different conclusion, then those will be contradicted by the Bhagavad Gita statements, other statements. But this conclusion, these conclusions are not contradicted by any other statements. This is actually the theme of the Bhagavad Gita also. So that's why people, they feel that because ISKCON is following Bhagavad Gita, and then Bhagavad Gita is biased, or the interpretation of Bhagavad Gita is biased, as they claim always. And so there are only two possibilities. One possibility is that they feel that why Krishna is considered to be the supreme. And another thing is that supreme which is spoken about in the Bhagavad Gita is basically the non-differentiated Brahman. But then that is very clearly refuted right in the first discussion that we had, that Brahman is actually subordinate to Krishna, and Brahman has got hierarchy. If you dissolve the hierarchy, then everything becomes one. So then there is no point for Krishna to say this, or Brahman to say that Brahman is subordinated to Brahman. Because if so, we know that Krishna is saying Brahman is subordinate to me, Brahma Jyoti, super soul, they are all subordinate to me. If you interpret Krishna is not saying about him, but it is the Krishna is the representative of the impersonal Brahman, and Brahman is the one which is superior, then what is that Brahman? Because Brahman is already discussed earlier. It is the Brahma Jyoti, or it can be considered to be the super soul, which is all pervading. So now why does Brahman say that Brahman is superior to Brahman or Brahma Jyoti? So that hierarchy dissolves and the meaning becomes pointless, right? So this hierarchy of different aspects of Brahman reveals that Krishna is indeed the supreme personality of Godhead, who is the source of everyone, everything. Aham sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvam pravartate. And the Lord also defines, that what is the goal of following the injunctions, principles of the Bhagavad Gita. The goal is to basically never to return to this material world, but to attain that particular abode. So which is that abode, and whose abode is that? So that also the Lord also clearly states later on in the slokas that we shared. So you'll see that everything, all the claims are all refuted. Because now there is no question of discussion about any demigod while discussing the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is not mentioning about any demigods as such. What people can conclude, either Krishna is the supreme, or they can conclude that Brahman is the supreme and Krishna is just the manifestation of that Brahman. But what about the other demigods? Where are they? So because the Bhagavad Gita very clearly states that, in fact, there is one particular shloka where Krishna clearly states that those who believe and feel that I was impersonal before and now I have become personal, or I have taken a personal form, they are muda. They are foolish people. They are unintelligent people. And then obviously there is the verse Janma Karma Chame Divyam, that is activities is form. They are all transcendental. So there is no question of the Lord, the Supreme Absolute Truth, only in the form of Brahman. And as we have discussed many times earlier also, that it leads to so many questions which are unanswered if we consider the Absolute Truth as the impersonal Brahman, right? So it is a clear refutation of all these things. And still people feel, now these are all direct translations of these shlokas. This is not even interpreted. We can easily come to understand that the verses itself, they speak about the hierarchy of Brahman and how living entity is superior to dull matter, and then um, the Brahman, Brahmajyoti, super soul, how they are superior to the living entity also, and how the living entity wants to achieve this goal. The living entity would like to achieve Brahmajyoti, become one with Brahmajyoti, or like to attain the Paramatma, right? Or to attain oneness with Paramatma. So obviously, if the living entity itself is, they are striving to achieve something, then that thing has to be superior to them. If they are superior, if the living entity is superior to uh, Brahmajyoti and the Paramatma, then why the living entity will try to achieve them? In fact, it should be the other way around. So this is very clearly, so straightforwardly communicated in the Bhagavad Gita, but unfortunately, we have so many people who have misinterpreted the Bhagavad Gita in their own language, suiting their own needs. That's why in the beginning itself, we had described and discussed, shared about the qualification of someone who is fit to hear and accept the Bhagavad Gita. And that qualification, Krishna, that's why right in the beginning, he describes that. He says that Bhakto si me saka cheti, that he has to be a devotee and he should be my friend. Friend means at least share a favorable attitude towards Krishna. So only these people, they will actually understand, really understand the Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, it is a matter of infinite views and opinions on the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, Bhagavad Gita in itself will lose its value just by having so many interpretations. Then what is the authenticity of Bhagavad Gita? That is completely lost. So that is why if you want to preserve the sanctity of the Bhagavad Gita as the most authoritative scripture, then it has to be understood the way it is presented. So this is just the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita. Now there are in different scriptures, there are so many statements, slokas that glorify Krishna as the supreme personality. Puranas, Upanishads, they all glorify Krishna. His activities are also like that. And not just the scriptures, but the realized sages, they also have admitted to this fact that how amongst the different forms of the Lord, the form of Krishna is the most attractive form and the most supreme form. So they have all agreed with this conclusion. Yeah. So you have any comments or any questions?
Yes, I think one is that you mentioned that people say that ISKCON misinterprets to just to give weightage to their philosophy of Krishna being the supreme. But see, interpretation is one thing, and one thing is direct translation, where really not much interpretation is required. So you have pointed out that there are very clear-cut shlokas where Krishna says that from me emanates this, and I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman. Like these are very clear. Now, how can others are they then mistranslating it? If they accuse ISKCON of misinterpreting, then does it mean that they are mistranslating purposely this? Because you can't make an error in translation. Interpretation people can have, but translation is a direct thing. Nah? There is there can't be anything more direct than a simple, straightforward translation.
Well, actually, see, there is in Sanskrit we can have multiple meanings of a particular word, and sometimes so one is a primary meaning and the other is a secondary meaning. So there is the mukhya vritti and there is the gona vritti, and mukhya means the primary and gona means secondary. So it all depends on how you translate according to the context. And sometimes the gona vritti or the secondary meaning makes more sense. It fits more in the definition than the primary meaning. So, for example, it is described in the scriptures that a village is situated on the bank of Ganges, or I think it is mentioned that a village is on the bank of Ganges. So if you literally translate the meaning, it comes to that a village is on the Ganges, which is not possible, right? If the village is on the Ganges, it will drown. So it is assumed that a village, when it is mentioned that it is on the Ganges, it is on the bank of Ganges. So like there are some statements like that which requires obvious common sense, and the secondary meaning is taken to be the true meaning of that. So in that sense, what the other monastic philosophers they have done, they have taken the secondary meaning or even sometimes the primary meaning and taken it out of context, and they have, using jugglery of words, they have interpreted in that particular way. So now see, when you are a monastic philosopher, your conclusion itself is that everything is one. So whatever statements, see, now there are certain statements where the Lord says that I am that supreme Brahman, I am Brahman. So it's a direct meaning. So they will take direct meaning for that. But wherever it is mentioned that Brahmanohi Pratishtaham, that I am the sustainer of Brahman, so they will not take it literally. They will use the secondary meaning of that. So like that, using jugglery of words, using their grammatical skills of Sanskrit and their intelligence, they will try to misinterpret, and they will try to evaluate in such a way that everything becomes aligned with the ultimate philosophy that they believe. So that's why our acharyas, what they have done, whatever Shankaracharya has quoted, whatever Mayavad philosophers they have quoted, whichever verses from the Gita or from the Upanishads, the same verses they have taken and they have interpreted in a completely contrary ways to show that how do you define which is primary meaning of the second. So this is what they have done, because everything can be interpreted, and it's not just the matter of interpretation. We have to see the final goal and the conclusion of the overall theme of the scriptures also, because scriptures speak about everything. It speaks about Brahman also, it speaks about Paramatma also, it speaks about Bhagwan also. So it has to be a holistic approach. We cannot reject certain portions of scriptures and just claim that this is the ultimate goal, or this is just imaginary, or this is just temporary. So it has to be like, and then overall we also have logical inference. Logically also we can come to the conclusion that how Bhagwan has to be the supreme tattva. If Bhagwan is not the supreme tattva, then what is the purpose of our existence? Why are we in the material world? So many questions are not answered by this. The entire concept of rasa is eliminated. Now, why human beings they have rasa? Right? Because this is also a scientific process. When someone becomes angry, then they may raise their voice, they may shout, they may beat someone. They will express a particular type of emotion, which is common for all the human beings. If someone is angry, they are not going to laugh or they are not going to dance. Angry means an emotion which is basically expressing a negative connotation. So every human being is going to express like that. And when they are happy, then they will dance, or they will clap, or they will share it with others. So that is a natural tendency of all the human beings, and this is the rasa. Now this rasa is actually a scientific thing. Just like there are scientific phenomena for the gross material body, similarly we are not taking into consideration the sentiments of a human being. So the sentiments of human beings are also scientific in nature. And these are all, they are applicable to all the living entities. It is not that one person expresses a different sentiment, another is expressing in the same circumstances or the same provoking situation, right? We are acting almost in the same way. So everything has a science, and this science of rasa is eliminated completely. The sentiments are gone. When we are talking about the absolute truth as being Brahman and we eliminate Bhagwan, then what is the sense of having rasa? Everything is one. So it's completely illogical.
So
But
yesterday,
when we, yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, but when we accept that, okay, there is a Bhagwan feature and then he's personal, and then when we have personalities, then we have relationships, then we have rasas, then all these emotions, sentiments, they are valued. They are, um, there is some benefit of having these sentiments, right? Because it is acknowledged and it is valued by the other person, and that person, that supreme person, reciprocates according to those sentiments. So we are not insentient beings. Otherwise, see, because we have sentiments, that's why there are laws also in the material world. Like, not, I'm not talking about the um, laws for the gross material world, but the laws that are applicable to the human beings, like violence, crime, all these things, they are, the laws are that, so that we are protected from such kind of things. Otherwise, if there are no sentiments, then we cannot expect all these laws also. So it's a natural system designed in the material world. We have laws, certain set of laws, and those laws, they inspire us to think intelligently, like that. So it makes sense, everything in the material world makes sense to us. But if you remove this sentiment, then everything is nonsense. Then no sentient being, no senses, like, why do we have to really worry about anything? We can do anything we want to do. There's no concept of relationship. So yeah.
So, uh, this the title Bhagwan. This is, as per our shastras, who is entitled to get uh, this position, this title? Only God, only the Supreme Personality, and some of his avatars, or all of his avatars, or any enlightened acharya who's of a very high uh, elevated position can also be given that title. I'm just asking you as a matter of query.
Yeah, so the word Bhagwan literally means Bhagavan, who is one who is the possessor of all the opulences. Now, this Bhagwan term is also used to describe devotees of the Lord, pure devotees of the Lord, or the avatars of the Lord, and the Lord Himself. So, because the thing is that Bhagwan generally should refer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one who is possessor of all the opulences in infinite degree. But by His empowerment, by His uh, mercy, any living entity can also be empowered by these things. One can also possess all these qualities or all these kind of opulences. So that time, that person can also be referred as Bhagwan. So this is also described in all the scriptures, like because different sages, demigods, and the Lord, they are all described as Bhagwan. And it can also mean, in another context, it can also mean Bhagwan means those who are attached to Bhagwan, Bhagavati, who's connected to connected to Bhagwan, like that. So they can also acquire this term Bhagwan, like that. It can refer to different. But see, the thing is, the concept is of eternity. So we cannot really say that who is fit to occupy this position or the post, because it's an eternal concept. So Bhagwan is eternal, his avatars forms are eternal, and we are also eternal. So now, uh, why are we calling now? See, who is that supreme personality of Godhead? How is he referred to as? He is referred to as Swayam Bhagwan. Like there will be Bhagwan, there are Bhagwans, many Bhagwans are there, but then he is described as Swayam Bhagwan or Param Purusham. Okay, so there are Purushas, there are Purusha avatars, but then he's Param amongst them. He's superior or supreme amongst them. Purusham Param. So these are exclusive words which are used to describe the one who is the greatest among all these different gods or avatars of the Lord. So ete chamsha kalatu pumsha Krishnas to Bhagwan Swayam. Krishnas to Bhagwan Swayam. So like that, along with Bhagwan, there is some specific and special term used in order to indicate the special position of the highest form of the absolute truth. And that highest form is the one who displays the maximum qualities amongst all the other forms of the Lord. And that display is done by Krishna. Maximum qualities is displayed only by Krishna, not even Lord Ram or Lord Narasimha or Lord Vara or Lord Shiva or Brahma. And that's how he is designated as special types of words along with Bhagwan.
So yesterday I happened to be invited to a gathering where the Shankaracharya of Puri had arrived. He's in Mumbai right now.
Okay.
So I'd gone and taken his darshan. And so when they address him, when they introduce Shankaracharya ji, his name is Nishchalananda Saraswati, Puri Shankaracharya. So when they address him on stage, when they introduce him to the gathering, they call him Bhagwan Shankaracharya of Puri, like that, around the name. So I was wondering that, this Bhagwan is, it's okay to call. Now, since he is from the Shankaracharya lineage, obviously they are the Mayavads, right? Is that right? But then when the mic was given to him, he started off with the chanting of Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Bol, Jai Jai Radha Raman. He started off with that. Then, I mean, it was all Govind, Krishna. These chants only he was. So it just seemed very fine actually. There was no issues with a person who's from Krishna consciousness attending, because he said what he was chanting was so favorable. So I was just wondering that Mayavadi, but then ultimately they're talking of Krishna only.
They are Panchapasanas, upasaks. They are worshippers of 5 gods, and one is Vishnu, one is Shiva, one is Lakshmi, I think, one is Ganapati, 4, and the last one maybe Durga.
Oh.
So yeah, so they worship 5 forms of the Lord or the Supreme Brahman, and but for them ultimately everything is one. So like I am Bhagwan, you are Bhagwan. So maybe whoever is the leader, they are probably addressed as Bhagwan, because maybe they have realized that I am one with Brahman or Bhagwan. I'm that Bhagwan. So like that, maybe it is possible. But they will chant the names of the Lord, but they think that it is inferior. It's all material. The form of the Lord is material. It is the temporary manifestation of Brahman. So that is offensive. That is actually, according to our Vaishnava philosophy, it's a criticism of the Lord's transcendental form. They make it material. So that is offensive. So although they chant the names, they also worship these gods, but ultimately their goal is to become one. Now, I am not, I mean, I think so that the Shankaracharya of Puri is also one of the Advaitavad followers of Shankaracharya. But what exactly his goal and philosophy is indicating, I assume, because he's Shankaracharya follower, so it should be Advaitavad. But we never know, like there are different sects also. So, yeah.
Okay. Pradeep, I think it's taken a lot of pains to go through various slokas, point by point, helping
Sorry?
us. So point by point through various slokas, I think you have taken us through and
Yeah.
deriving the essence of the import of the
Yes.
Param Tattva as described in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in the next class, then we'll take some other topic, which is also connected to decoding the conclusion of the Gita. So what we did is we have come to the conclusion that Bhakti Yoga is the essence. Then we also came to the conclusion that uh, there is the demigod worship is subordinate to the worship of Krishna, and Krishna is the supreme Param Tattva. That is what we have discussed so far. And in the first session, we had discussed about the eligibility to understand and read the Bhagavad Gita and to interpret the Bhagavad Gita, and how yoga is also interpreted as Bhakti Yoga, right? So we'll continue. I think a couple of topics will be there, and then we can probably finish this series of decoding the final conclusion of Gita. So thank you, Rajiv ji, for your time, and thank you all the viewers for joining in. Thank you so much.
Okay. Krishna.